Now we should be good. Susie, you good? Okay, excellent. Okay, Jen, over to you. Welcome, everyone.
Okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jen Weavers, and I'm BPOC's Director of Finance and Strategic Operations. With me is BPOC's CEO, Nick Honeysett, and our research analyst, Devin Matson. If you're joining us for the first time, BPOC started this webinar series in 2020 to help facilitate critical conversations around the technologies used in museums, libraries, archives, and galleries, and provide a free resource for the community. Just as a reminder, if you could use the Q&A for any questions, I'll collect them for the session at the end. Before we hand it over to Susie, owner and CEO of Guru Experience, Nick would like to say a few words of introduction.
Okay, thanks, Jen. This is kind of a disclaimer, but also some background about the project that we're doing. So BPOC is in San Diego. Guru Experience started in San Diego. The park and BPOC was the first platform that Guru experimented with their experience platform on. So we've been working with them for quite some time. We currently, which is a kind of precursor to what we're going to talk about mostly today, we have a wayfinding app in the park, which gets you around the park. Balboa Park is a 1,200-acre park. The Central Mesa is about 250 acres and home to about 30 cultural institutions. 17 of those are collecting museums. Guru also has a couple of mobile apps in some of those museums too. So one of the challenges, and I think my kind of big intro to this is you really need a business case to do a technology project, right? It's what is the problem that we're trying to solve? And we do have a problem that we're trying to solve in the park, which is the paradox of choice. We've done a bunch of analyses over the years, both us and external agencies have done analyses to figure out, we have a lot of people in the park. We reckon around 10 to 12 million people in the park per year. About half of those are going into the institutions themselves. Why is that? So part of the studies that we found is the buildings themselves were built about 100 years ago. They're not the most welcoming buildings. They have very impressive facades, but they're not the most welcoming buildings for a public access kind of visitor experience. And so the findings were that people don't know what they're going to see when they get inside the buildings. They don't know whether they're going to see themselves represented, and why should they spend some money to cross the threshold and go into the museums. So this largely what we're going to talk about today is how do you compel a visit? How do you influence somebody who is wandering around the park to go into one of those museums? They have a choice. We do have some kind of Uber tickets that allow people to pick a selection of those institutions to go into them. And so we are trying to leverage a digital experience to compel visitors to cross that threshold. And so Susie's going to talk kind of generally about kind of where we are with kind of experience platforms, but also going to focus on really what we're trying to achieve with this business case. We received funding from a local foundation. We had much bigger aspirations about what we wanted to do. We wanted to do kind of a full-on digital AI-driven escape room, but they asked us to prove some points first. And so those are the points that we're trying to prove really is, can we influence a visit in this kind of contained, measured environment that we're in, leveraging technology. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Susie. Like I said, we've been working with Guru for quite some time, and she's going to kind of step through a few things and tell us what's going on. So over to you, Susie. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, we have been leveraging technology, specifically AI, in this use case. You know, the goal is very much so to help gamify the experience, to get users to see if we can get them and drive them into the institutions throughout the park. So one of the main things that we thought about was, how do you gamify it in a way that also is personalized and uses technology in a way that is fun for users, but also makes the experience different for returning users. And AI is one of those tools that gives the ability for randomness, and have experiences be different every single time. So the experience that we're currently working on allows users to interact in a way where they are asking questions but then seeking answers of, Nick, is it okay if I go into detail?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
no. Release the Kraken. I mean, I think
Okay.
that's why we're here. Right?
So I want to make sure that was okay. So, essentially they have an app. We're focusing on a specific institution as a test case where we use our CMS database, where we have it populated with all of the content from that museum that you would typically use in a museum app. So already having that content, kind of preloaded that the museum would utilize for their app, we can then pair that with AI, where it then gives the opportunity to gamify the experience, where AI is really only accessing the data that's available in the CMS, where it then knows what the exhibitions are, the layout of the museum. It has mapping capabilities already, and it can generate essentially a scavenger hunt like path throughout the institution using AI to generate gamified puzzles for the user to solve as they move through the experience. Because we are partnered with BPOC, means we also have Balboa Park at large, so we have a lot of context and data around that as well. So being able to pair that with the user in Balboa Park, knowing if they are outside the institution, we can help navigate them towards the institution. In this case, a specific use case that we're starting with, headed towards that path. In the initial MVP of it, we'll let users know that it is geared towards a single institution at the moment, but the goal is to expand that to multiple institutions, where they then have a gamified experience that can be more geared towards the things they're interested in. So if you start the experience and you're really interested in art or automotive or gardens, photography, we then can use that knowledge to drive users towards those institutions in a gamified way, where the AI essentially predetermines a list of, we're targeting about 15 experiences, puzzles, games throughout it, where maybe they are in the center of the park. The first 3 are potentially outside of the institution and leading you towards that. So you're kind of on a hunt towards the thing that you're ultimately trying to go into. So the puzzles can be a whole range of things, but AI is coming up with those essentially on the fly, but utilizing the objects that are throughout the park and into the institution based on a theme. We're also layering it so that it is age determined. We haven't decided if we're specifically going to ask for age or if it's just easy, medium, hard, based off of the types of puzzles that you want to solve for. But the ultimate goal will be to see who crosses that threshold, because not only are there obstacles in terms of people downloading an app and then navigating throughout the park, the biggest obstacle is then the paywall of entering the museum and paying to enter the museum. And we anticipate that there will be a drop off when you hit that point, but it will be good data to show what the engagement level is up to that point, and then how many of those are inspired to cross the threshold. So that's kind of the overarching concept of what we're building and working on, and leveraging technology, specifically AI, to gamify and randomize the experience so users can do it over and over again.
So maybe a little, there actually is a Q&A before we maybe go any further about the word gamify.
Yes. So gamify, I think, could mean, multiple different things. In this sense, we kind of picked a type of game. Our initial focus was on escape rooms, and how do we digitally give that same type of experience. And we ultimately wheeled it back a little bit in terms of like racing against the clock, but the gamification, as in you're solving puzzles, which could be word puzzles, it could be you need to find a specific object and prove that you've found it. I think there's, right now, I think we have maybe 7 or 8 games that we have like set up, but it's, there's new games coming out all the time. We don't want them to be super complex. One of the most popular games is Wordle, and that's because, it's fun, it's not that hard, and, kind of quick to do. Like things like that, that inspire users to get to the next thing, but are specifically related to the collection and to the institution that we're driving them to.
So, Susie, you've been working on a couple of things, particularly around AI stuff, particularly the docent app. Do you have access to share the screen so we can take a look at that?
I believe so. Let me.
While you're doing that, maybe a little kind of intro. I think, partly we're all trying to figure out how do we leverage AI both behind the scenes and in front, and certainly this docent app, leveraging AI to not replace but enhance docent experience, I think is a really interesting idea.
Thank you. Can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
So to answer the question that we have in Q&A right now, no, it's not available currently at Balboa Park. Nick and his team recently got a grant for it. We've been working with them on it, and it's a very complex project, as I'm sure everyone can imagine, and it's a completely unknown territory in terms of how it's executed in a way that contains AI in general, but also has the speed that's required to engage a user on a specific level. So if it was solely based on AI and AI was doing the entire thing, you'd be sitting there, with lag on your phone. So we're utilizing it in key parts. And then ultimately how visitors would find out about it is through messaging throughout the park, with Nick and Jen's relationship throughout the park as a whole.
And this will resonate with everybody, particularly with technology projects. We had hoped by this time that we would have some kind of pilot, but this has been a interesting kind of spearhead maneuver into the challenges of unleashing AI on the public, right? Lisa has a question about funding and stuff. I'll cover that in a bit. Why don't you go ahead, Lisa, Susie?
Sure. Okay, everybody can see my screen though?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're Guru Experience. I think Nick covered this a little bit, but for those who don't know us, we are, my background is audio tours and creating additional layers of engagement for users. I very much followed the, skim, swim, dive. This is what we produce is for the users to have that ability to do that on their own devices through museum apps where they can access content, skimming through it, swimming through it, or diving through it. So one of the things that, we've been working on and, is still beta, but is very, we see the need for it. One of the biggest things that we run into with museums is with docents, they're getting fewer and far between having reliable, knowledgeable, engaging docents. I wish that every visitor who walked through the door had the opportunity to walk through with a docent, but that's just not the world that we're living in this, time and place. Some, for example, battleships are a couple of our clients. A lot of those are veterans who, are not able to be on site anymore, not able to walk through the ships and share their knowledge with visitors as they go through. And how do we capture that and ensure that visitors who are not able to take a docent tour, not because they don't want to, it's just because the nature of having docents is they're not always available, and it can be harder and harder to get those people as staff on the museum. So we kind of have been looking through the history of audio tours. In the early 90s it was handheld devices, which is what my background is in. Then museums started to do things a little more digital in the 2000s, having archives online, moving things into the cloud-based system, having dams, getting all of that stuff up and running where users could find information about it on the web. That's when people started Googling stuff. Around the 2010s, that's when mobile apps became more popular, and museums started to adapt to some of those things while having maybe both, maybe just having a website. When we get into the 2020s, that's when mobile apps have been commonplace, and more advanced technology like AR, VR, and immersive digital has come into the space. So the engagement for visitors has been moving along those paths, and all of these things are supplemental to the visitor's experience. I believe in an eyes up experience. You want users engaging with the museum and what's in the institution, but there's always going to be that percentage of users who want more, need more from an accessibility standpoint, or want to be able to share and look at information post visit. So how do we do that? One of the things that we've been discussing and building out and have done quite a bit of testing and have a beta version of this is having a museum docent AI. And our first test case that we did on this, on how to train this, and it's giving a little bit of the underlining of how it's done. It needed to be based on a real docent, and it needed to have that type of context that you get from really engaging with docents. So what we did was we mic'd 4 different docents in an institution, and we had them do their standard docent tour. Of course, they were with a group of us. We had normal interaction. We asked questions, they gave feedback, they gave us anecdotes, they told stories about things. We got about 6 hours of docent recordings it was over like a 3-day period with all of their docents that were their main docents for the institution. We then took those 6 hours of audio, had it all transcribed, fed it back into AI, and then used that to generate essentially the outline of our docent AI, teaching our docent AI to act and respond like a museum docent would, and give context and use the knowledge that also the docent supplied in that feedback. And this docent AI that we've built essentially is very contained. It has knowledge about general information. So for example, you're at one museum, you ask it about another museum, it'll say, you know, that's a fantastic museum that's on the East Coast. You're currently at XYZ Museum, and we have contemporary art very similar to this museum. Here's things you could see here with us. So it has general world knowledge, but it doesn't have, it's not going to be like, oh, you want to see artwork from that museum? Here's where you find it and how you get to it. We've contained it specifically to the content that you've given it in the CMS. So we've paired it with our CMS and allow it to look at your exhibitions, your events, your items, and it's only responding and giving context on the stuff that we've given it. And in many cases, we can use actual docent transcripts to say, also use these stories, these anecdotes, these Easter eggs, this type of information. So it can be very confined, or it can be a lot broader, depending on how much information or context you want to give it. But the important reasons why we've been looking at doing this is personalization. Some people are super interested in going to art museums because they want to know, how was this made? What's the paint that was utilized in this artwork? Or how old is this? Are they looking at it from a history standpoint? Why were these figures painted in this light? Having that ability to look at things that are relevant to the actual user just gives that one more layer of personalization where users feel they have access to the specifics that they want to get access to. And then having the engagement beyond the typical tour guide, only because you're now giving it access to essentially what any of your tour guides are. So for example, this one institution where we did all the recordings, leadership had said, like, well, we have, one guy who like really likes to talk about this stuff because that's what he's interested in. But if you go with this other person, they actually have read like the entire history books for all of these things, and they're going to give you a broader context. So having essentially both of those two people combined gives such a different blended view versus like maybe you'll get one experience with this docent or one experience with the other docent. But ultimately, to say this is never and not meant to replace the human interaction. It's meant to supplement it when that's not available. Or for those people who are shy and introverts and don't want to ask questions, maybe they're on the tour and they don't want to ask the question, they can just quickly check it with the docent AI. So, the
Actually,
problems that we're trying.
Susie, just one thing, you might mention about the benefit of actually teaching docents with the app.
That is also one, Nick, you're the consultant, so more comfortable saying that. I tend to not tell or give advice on training staff, but yes, that is a good handbook also for the docents themselves to be able to bounce back to and say, oh, I'm not really sure what that one is. Let me check that. Very good point, Nick. So the purpose of this is really meant to serve for real world problems. Accessibility, is a problem. I myself am somebody who will walk through a museum in 20 minutes when it takes other people an hour and a half. And that's because I need something to slow me down. I need another layer of engagement that helps me dive deep. MoMA, I worked at MoMA in the audio tour program as a vendor for years. And the Jackson Pollock painting, I have an art degree, never understood its relevancy until I listened to the full audio tour as why that was such an important piece, and a single one wall full up there. I'd gone through it, knew all, all the info about it, but never got the full context until I had something to slow me down. It probably said all that stuff on the wall label, but I never stopped to read it. But that's just because I have an alternative learning style, and I think many do. And that's the people that you're looking to cater to and have this accessibility resource available for people who learn differently or just enjoy learning more. Language barriers. That's, an instant huge plus is that with AI specifically, it's in many languages. If we can use the native language that somebody has in their phone, it helps alleviate that issue that maybe they don't understand what the wall text says or are trying to translate it. To be able to get things in their native language is a huge resource. And the accessibility challenges, which I kind of covered. But, the big step would be providing engagement, personalized resource that users could access. So we've mocked up. These are just mock-ups, examples of what it potentially could look like. I personally like seeing a humanoid figure. Half my team doesn't. So whether that would all be up to the museum in general, like whether there is a robot figure or any figure, or if it's a glowing orb, whatever the case may be. But essentially, you've come to your docent AI, you can ask it questions, it introduces itself, it gives the availability to give some suggestions, like, are you looking for exhibitions today? Are you looking to, learn more about a specific, period in time? You ask it questions, it gives you, feedback, which is based off of just your CMS data and any data that you've given it. But then the key for us is, we're a cloud-based platform. Everything needs to connect to one another. And so having it actually not be a separate thing, but integrate with the rest of the content with the app. So populating your exhibitions that are in your digital experience, pointing users directly to those things, linking to the direct objects or items or stops that are in the app. And beyond that, we have unique mapping capabilities and navigating users throughout an indoor space. So additionally saying, would you like to go there? And then navigating them to that space. So that's what we've been, in a nutshell, working on, and, are excited to share it with the community, and would love to hear feedback, questions, thoughts, concerns on any of it, because we are in, the beginning stages, and, our goal is to make something that museums are, one, comfortable with, feel confident in, and, think their users would engage and enjoy as a resource.
So while everyone's thinking about questions, let me jump in on the question that Lisa asked about funding, because we're a nonprofit, so we need to raise money, and so we know how hard it is to raise money for purely digital or technology projects. So I think there are a couple of aspects of what made this successful. So one is we are incredibly lucky in that we represent a group of museums, right? So we're our own nonprofit, but we work with the museums in Balboa Park. So when we go after funding, we're actually representing up to 30 cultural institutions. And so it gives us enormous power. It gives the grantor great return on their investment. I think that's one. And this was a local foundation. San Diego is home to the pharmaceutical industry, military. It's a pretty healthy startup environment, aerospace, aviation. And so there are about half a dozen big philanthropists who are sadly passing away, but fortunately setting up these big foundations. And so one of them is the Conrad Prebys Foundation. Conrad Prebys headed up a pharmaceutical conglomerate, and he set up a foundation a few years ago, and we were lucky enough to get in front of them. So we are representing a lot of institutions. This actual project is kind of like a rider on a legislative, I can't even say that word, bill, in that the biggest ask was to redo all the IT infrastructure in the park. So we are responsible for the network, the Wi-Fi, the connectivity to most of the institutions in the museum. We have this shared service approach to that. That technology has been in effect for about 15 years now, maybe a little longer. Some of you on the webinar will know the name Rich Cherry. Rich Cherry was the founding director of BPOC, and he originally was the one who set up all that infrastructure. But it's over the last couple of years, it's been failing. And so we have found that crisis issues are good to go to foundations with. There's definitely kind of like a crisis premium when you're talking to a foundation, because literally some of the networking was failing. And so we tacked onto that, again, because this requires decent connectivity. And we do plan to do much more ambitious kind of AR-based experiences, which will require a higher bandwidth than we have right now. So we tacked this project on top of that network infrastructure project. We were also able, I mentioned about at the beginning about we've done various studies over the years, and one more recently, which is kind of confirming what the institutions are seeing. The institution's attendance is down. There are institutions going to that same foundation and others trying to get grant money to come up with projects that will increase the attendance. And like I said, we are lucky to have people in the park. It's just them crossing the threshold into the institution. So I think data is really important. Having a crisis is really important. And really, you know, when we're trying to raise money with foundations, you know, it's like going to startup investors, right? They want to be excited and see something cool as well, right? They're really no different than kind of federal funders. You know, local foundation startups, you know, they want to know that you can succeed, that you can deliver something that they can actually, you know, assign their name to. So I think there's a few kind of compelling reasons about why that is successful. I don't know whether that helps you, Lisa, but you're right. And so we do, you know, one of the other things with this actual project is it's kind of sitting on the shoulders of this current app that we have, which is kind of more informational. And what we're hoping to do is turn this into a much more experiential engagement. And as Susie alluded to, and I mentioned, we did actually start off with a much bigger ask, which was to have a full-on digital AI-driven escape room that would take collection objects, create that kind of timed delivery. And that's really probably one of the truer definitions of gamify is this real experience, timed. There's we have had a couple of escape room experiences in the park. Natural History Museum did actually just before the pandemic, did an escape room called Botanic Panic, which ironically, the story was that there is a virus in China, I kid you not, and someone is getting on a plane from China to San Diego, so that you have the time of that flight to use plants to come up with the antidote for that virus. You won't be surprised to hear that escape room shut down. It was actually very successful.
That is nuts.
I kid you not. Botanic Panic. So I think, Jen, we had a couple of, if there aren't any questions, I think we did have some questions, but I think the big thing, which is probably on everybody's mind, is kind of the value of these experiences, and are they doing, are they delivering on what they should? And this whole notion of kind of emerging generations, there's counter information to say they want to use it, and then there's data that says, well, even emerging generations want to go to a museum to have a disconnect from technology experience. I'm not sure I believe that last one, but there is some data that suggests that's true.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I think the answer is you're never having additive type experiences like this. The goal should never be to have everyone do it. There's, anywhere from 2% to 20% of people want to engage with digital elements. Some people just want to completely zone out. Some people are going as a social thing. But I do think having the resources available that actually is going to give contextual data and information that the museum wants to put through. Like, one of the things I think about in my position is always when I go into discovery meetings with clients, I get all the fun behind the scene information. I hear the stories of like how this painting, moved from here to here, and then, ultimately, the frame didn't fit, and all the fun behind the scenes stuff is what I get access to because I'm being walked around by, the curators, the leaders of the institution, who are all super passionate about what they are, bringing to the public, that I wish everybody got to have that type of information, or at least had access to it should they want to find it. It's those, the Easter egg information that people don't necessarily get access to or know about just by walking through. It's that type of thing as to why I love doing what I do, is being able to add that additional layer where at least that information is available. Some of the exhibitions that we work on with curators, they have 25-page book on, a one-room exhibition that they've put together with so much information on the context of everything that's in there. When you ultimately get one paragraph on the gallery wall label that users are reading, pared down from 25-page PDF, having a docent AI or any type of resource that has that information and can pull out the information that the users are most interested in, readily available to the user, I only see as that resource for people who want to dive deep or want to have the ability to find that information, not by trying to Google it, because most likely they're not going to get something that is super relevant.
Right. There's a this probably the $60,000 question is, did you see increased attendance in the museum after implementing the app? So we're working on a pilot right now, but I should probably explain, this is our third time's a charm attempt to influence a visit. The previous one, so the wayfinding one was kind of attempt number one, and that was and we did track using beacons at the admissions counter. We did track whether people were using the app to help themselves get around the park. I think the most successful feature was Find My Car. And so this is going back to like 10 years, right? So you drop a pin when you park your car. We have 17 different parking lots here. And so it's difficult. So that was kind of attempt one, just purely informational, just a service to the public. And we realized that wasn't moving the needle in a way that we wanted, although we were tracking people using the app and entering the museums. And we found that it's kind of in thirds. People were using the app before they came to the park. They were using it. A third were using it when they got here, of the people who actually opened it. But we also found about a third of people were opening the app after they left the park because we were tracking their location when they opened it. The second attempt was this concept of playlists, where we were providing, so it's kind of a precursor to more kind of passive version of this, but it's kind of a precursor to a list of interesting collection objects. Again, we have this paradox of choice, right? 17 museums, I'm here for 3 hours, what should I go and see? So there are the standard, well, these are the highlights, but that's based on the museum's itself perception of what the highlights are, and may not align with the interests of the public. So we started creating these themed playlists of about a dozen collection objects put together on kind of an infinite scroll type of presentation. And it was a lens, a mostly pop culture lens of collection objects. And my favorite example, I have a couple, but one was, and this will date it, was Harry Potter. So it was a Harry Potter playlist of collection objects. So we have a model railroad, so it has a steam engine train locomotive outside. We have dragons in the Natural History Museum. We have wacky mirrors in the Fleet Science Center. We have paintings, portraits that follow you in the art museum. So we put these collections of playlists together, which was more of kind of a passive route, but through the park, but a lens that's going to get you to 4 or 5 different institutions. The most successful one, which we still have in a different form available, was a fairy tale playlist, which was designed for kids to take their parents through a route through the park. So the iconic image of Balboa Park is the California Tower. So that was where Rapunzel, was locked up. There were kind of magic beans in the Museum of Us, formerly the Museum of Man. And so there was tortoise and hares in the natural history. So we were coming up with these playlists. We definitely moved the needle from our perspective, but the challenge was people were most interested in the larger institutions. So the differential of increased visitation was much smaller. And so Susie and I and the team have had this conversation about which is the ideal institution to pilot with first. If it's a large institution, it's going to be harder to demonstrate that we've moved the needle, just kind of, statistically, if you have a larger attendance, then moving the needle is going to be harder. If it's one of the smaller institutions, then it's the data and the collections information isn't as readily available as the larger one. So you've kind of got this balance about, well, what are we trying to prove? So that we know it will increase the attendance. I think the nub is it going to be enough purely selfishly for us to go back to the foundation and say, we want to expand this, we want to grow this. So that's that. I think there was a question about a plant.
Yeah,
Is it that one or is it another one?
The one after the increased attendance is about Guru building a docent app of its own. So just to clarify, Guru as a company, we build white label things for institutions. Our names are not on it, and it is solely based on the museum's content and the museum's owned content. We don't own any of it. It's just in our software that we provide and host everything and provide the platform and the ability to do all these things. No, Guru is not building our own. We're not utilizing any of the museum data outside of it. It is solely for the purpose of an add-on to the museum experience that already exists with the museum. Like any of our clients, Guru's name's not on any of it. It is the museum's app and their app to the public. We just are the software and team that helps support it and provide that. Hopefully that helps clarify.
And yeah, Lisa makes a really good point. Despite the prevalence of QR codes in restaurants for the menu, it's still a challenge to get people to scan that. We did, in the early phases of the original wayfinding app, we did have notifications on because essentially what's happening in the park, people are walking past literally the front door of a museum, and they may not even know there's a museum there. Some of the museums, like Museum of Photographic Arts and the History Center and Model Railroad, they're kind of behind this very impressive kind of South American facade. I mean, it really is a spectacular place if you've never been to Balboa Park. So we did set up these kind of regions to, if somebody was on the app, it would send a notification to say, hey, there's a tour about to start, or there's an exhibition here, or whatever the information might be. Of course, that relied on people's having a setting that allowed notifications, but it is a challenge. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Susie. How do you get people to scan those copies?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to museum operations. If this is seen as a resource by your team, by your visitor services who have helped build it, helped provide information for it, they see it as a resource and not something that they're competing with, which they shouldn't and is never meant to be. Then having it actually be part of the pitch, part of their script when they buy their tickets and purchase it, being able to have access to these things, it really does come down to the broader support within the institution. A lot of the times, these types of experience can be seen as like a separate thing. And we all know the difficulties of museum departments where maybe one museum department had created this and there's overlap here, but essentially the digital experience should be something that all of the museums departments feel as a resource. Normally my number one people that I go talk to when I'm in the museum and want to know how things are going is the security guards. They are the people who are on the floor, in the rooms, in the galleries, who are actually seeing people utilize it, the difficulties they're having, any technological issues. They're the person who people see as like, oh, you work here, like, can you help me with this? So like it is visitor services and it's the people on the floor that have to be part of it and know this is an offering and it is the museum's offering, it's the institution's offering. These are our words, it's our story and we're the ones sharing it. It's not a separate thing of another company saying, oh, this is what we think the museum wants to tell people. It is the museum's resource, and if it is filtered that way from top down, then that's when you see a significant uptake in success. Like one of our institutions was all just veterans who had recorded it, and then a lot of veterans were also working. It was on a battleship, and we had phenomenal take up there of like over 50% on average. But that's because these veterans who, it was hard for them to do an hour tour and talk all day long and stay consistent, being able to say like, hey, hear my story in the way I intended it to be heard here, and giving that, like, it really is buy-in from the people on the ground actually interacting with the visitors, and having them be part of the process and understanding this is a resource for the visitors, you know, not competing against those on the floor.
Right. We saw that when I was at the Getty. We saw the uptake of the Getty guide was around about 3%, but it was a very passive. It was just like, oh, there's a Getty guide here if you'd like to take that around with you, as opposed to, you know, more of a kind of an experiential sale. And I think the one thing that had the biggest impact was an iPad on the admissions desk that just had a rolling kind of instruction about how to use it. And I think that doubled the uptake. And I think, and also at some point we had just staff wandering around with it. It was a very kind of iconic kind of red handheld thing. And we had staff wandering around with this red thing hanging on with a big badge saying, ask me what this is.
On QR codes, one more thing. One of our clients who's currently using them, their biggest uptake of the QR codes is on the benches. It's like 4 times the uptake on any of the other QR codes at the entrances, anywhere near objects, walking into galleries. It's the benches, specifically outside the restrooms. So it's, you know, somebody sitting waiting for their partner to come out of the restroom. They're like, all right, I'll scan this QR code.
You know, it amazes me why there isn't more interpretation happening inside restrooms.
That is one we did when I worked with Smithsonian, was on the back of the stall doors. We did just little vinyl stickers that were like, you know, did you know? And then it had, I think this was before the QR code craze, but, you know, did you know, XYZ gave a fact, an Easter egg, and it was like, you know, find out more, and had a little symbol of the app.
Yeah, you know, sometimes it's the unusual things. I remember doing a study for art museum in St. Louis, trying to doing an attendance study and just trying to figure out where people were going and whether they were going into the galleries. And it turned out, because they were the only free restrooms in this huge park, that 50% of the people going into the museum went straight to the restroom and came back out. So rather than get upset about it, they started putting interpretive content into the restrooms. It had a big effect. Actually, and did substantially increase their attendance to the galleries. Okay, what else? Anything else? Any more questions? What's your thought about emerging generations? You know, it occurs to me, you know, we're doing 10-year strategic planning for museums now, particularly around the digital experience, and just the whole issue about Gen Alpha. Is it Gen Alpha? I get these confused. Gen Alpha is going to be an adult in, you know, within that 10-year time span. You know, just there. I watched this very alarming presentation about this guy who had divided up everybody's lifespan into a circle per month. And so he just had this graphic of all these circles. And I think there was like about 80 circles, I think, maybe for, no, that can't be right.
I've seen that, yeah.
And so he just goes through about, okay, so this is how many circles take up sleeping. This is how many circles take up working, you know, restroom, showering, all that kind of stuff. And then this is how many circles take up on your phone for Gen Alpha. And it was the largest percentage. It was unbelievably alarming. And so just as, well, all of us are thinking about putting, strategies in place that are going to carry us through the next 5 to 10 years, I think you have to acknowledge that they are connected to their phone and their device in a way that we think is just batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, I mean, I think until the one thing that I understandably so, museums are careful about how they approach their social media and what they're saying. There are cases where when there is the liberty to be a little bit more jokey on stuff, or satire on things, is when I've seen success in the younger generation participating, of like, let's make a little bit light of this, but yet give some context. I think when it may be too analytical, or come as like, I'm basically in school learning a history lesson, that the younger generation is zoning out because what they're watching on TikTok all day is drama, jokes,
right.
Right.
I think that we're probably at time. I just posted a link. Anybody who wants what I consider to be one of the best examples of compelling content that is contextual, relevant, and had a quite a significant impact on lowering the attendance of a Medici exhibition at the Met, is that primer that's on their website. Okay, 2 minutes, gift of time. Jen.
Thank you, Susie and Eric, for coming onto the series today, and for everyone who joined in to listen and ask questions. BPOC will be back November 1st with another webinar with Bart Vasons, a professor of big data and analytics, who will be sharing his research and discussing some of the most recent developments in generative AI. I will put the Zoom registration link in the chat for those who are interested, and you can learn more about that through that link. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook to stay current on our activities, including announcements for future webinars. Hope everybody has a wonderful week.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.